Ronald the Rules Lawyer, and today I'm going to be covering the Mythic rules that are now being released for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I have the Mythic rules for 1st Edition of Pathfinder, and they were janky as fuck. And I thought that at the time, even before I realized that there was one S in that phrase. But they were glorious. You could break the game even more than you already could in 1st Edition. You could run up to enemies and do full attacks. You could do huge damage with Mythic Power Attack. It was 1st Edition double downing on that power fantasy of letting you break the game. Now, the designers of 2nd Edition have reined in that kind of power gaming and have decided to make it much more balanced and easier on a game master. But that doesn't mean that they are averse to allowing some power gaming. And in fact, the fact that they have bounded their game within certain limits allows them to, in a controlled way, let people break those limits through these rules. Hence, War of Immortals, which comes out at the end of this month. I'm recording this middle of October of 2024. I was surprised to find that actually the majority of this book deals with this rules expansion for Pathfinder. I thought initially that was about some new classes and class archetypes and that Mythic was an afterthought, but actually Mythic is the main topic of this book. In fact, it envisions a different kind of Pathfinder campaign, I would argue, one that is more player-driven, where the players and the GM come up with their own story and arc of where the campaign will go. This will become clearer when we see some of the abilities that you gain. In the Pathfinder campaign setting of Golarion, the god of battle, Gorum, has died, and his divine essence has been dripping down on the world, infusing people with sparks of divine essence. This has caused turmoil around the world, shaking people's fates and their gods, and raising old spirits. That's why this book also introduces 2 new classes, the Exemplar, who has a spark of divine essence, and the Animist, who bonds with and uses the abilities of powerful spirits. Concurrent with the release of this book is also an adventure path, and a Pathfinder adventure, and a whole set of organized play scenarios. The book actually has 16 pages of lore on how the God's Reign is affecting the entire world of Golarion. I'm planning 6 videos on this book. The first 3 will deal with the Mythic rules. Today I cover Mythic characters. In the next video, I'll look at the Mythic Destinies and other Mythic rules. And in the 3rd video, I will look at Mythic monsters that will be challenging these Mythic heroes. Uh-oh, it's Megan. Megan's here. And then I'll have videos on the Animist and the Exemplar, and then finally end with a video on the class archetypes that bring in popular classes from 1st Edition Pathfinder, but now give you optional ways to play certain classes in this edition. So if you want to see those videos, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to get notified. And support my Patreon if you want access to these videos immediately when I make them. So let me introduce myself. I'm Ronald the Rules Lawyer. I'm a lawyer who runs tabletop role-playing games. For several years, I ran an after-school, middle-school role-playing game class. And support my Patreon. I don't earn money as an attorney. And for more info on that, look at this video. And supporting my Patreon gives you ad-free early access to most of my videos and exclusive content. Okay, Megan, stop making muffins on my bare thigh. Ow! Ow, Megan, I said my safe word. Alright, so what are Mythic characters? Characters in Pathfinder 2nd Edition are already exceptional and above their peers in power, though Mythic characters, the designers envision, harken back to the classical myths of yore. Think of classical Greek myths, or the myths and legends of other societies, and their folk heroes and the demigods. Mythic heroes and villains, even at lower levels of play, possess fantastical powers that are unbound by physics. And as they get to higher level, they increasingly have power to affect the narrative of the game world. Becoming mythic can happen at any point in your adventuring career, though it can also happen at 2nd level, but it's not even necessarily restricted to that. All mythic characters have several things. First is a calling. It's that moment you become mythic, whether it's in an encounter, being infused by a powerful energy, from a god, perhaps, having the God's Reign infuse you with a divine spark. You could even be born with a calling. And it lists about a dozen callings that you can have. When you gain the calling, you are able to do certain skill actions and activities with mythic proficiency. Here's an example called Caretaker's Calling. When you treat disease, treat poison, treat wounds, or use battle medicine, you get to make that attempt with mythic proficiency while spending a mythic point, which I'll get to later. Now, what is mythic proficiency? Those of you who know Pathfinder know that there are 4 levels of proficiency that you can gain. Each gives you a proficiency bonus equal to your level plus some number. And mythic proficiency is beyond even the highest level of legendary. It is beyond that. You get to add your level plus 10. Your calling also gives you additional edicts and anathema. And the first time each day you critically succeed on some checks, usually the same checks that you can use mythic proficiency on, then you regain a mythic point. And also, if you know Pathfinder, a lot of skill activities require you have some minimum level of proficiency to succeed at it. And mythic, because it's above every other level, means that you can succeed on basically any task, essentially, so long as you can somehow meet the DC. So this means that at the starting levels, when you're not better than trained in pretty much every skill, you can increase your bonus by 8. It's almost the equivalent to increasing the degree of success of your check. Another thing that some callings do is give you access to a Mythic Feat, only available to that calling, and we'll get to Mythic Feats soon. All right, every other Mythic character also gets the Rewrite Fate ability. Rewrite Fate is a free action that when you roll a skill check or a saving throw and don't like the result, you can re-roll it, but with Mythic Proficiency. This has the Fortune trait naturally, and this costs a Mythic point. Now, shrewd viewers will see an issue, and this will be the first issue I'll bring up about the Mythic rules, which look like a lot of fun to me, but I think there are some issues that need addressing here, which is this really diminishes the value of those callings that we just looked at. Those callings let you spend a Mythic point that you had to declare before attempting certain skill checks, a subset of skill activities, to get Mythic Proficiency on it. This allows you to, when you fail or critically fail, if you don't like the result for whatever reason, then decide to spend a Mythic point to re-roll it, also with a Mythic Proficiency. And it's not limited to any subset of skill checks, and it can be used on saving throws also. Now, granted, this has the Fortune trait, and the ability from your calling does not. So you could theoretically spend a Mythic point to attempt something at Mythic Proficiency and have the fallback of rewriting fate and spending a second Mythic point. So there's that use case. Besides that, it seems to swallow most of the benefit of those callings. Now, what are Mythic points? Well, first, they replace hero points. You do not gain hero points if you have Mythic points. The usual use of hero points to re-roll a check you don't like has been supplanted by Rewrite Fate. However, Rewrite Fate is limited to skill checks and saving throws, whereas hero points could be used for re-rolling attack rolls. That is something lost here. One can see the reasoning here. Getting Mythic Proficiency on attack rolls could really change the math of the game. And gaining Mythic Proficiency on attacks is walled off until level 6 or so, as we'll see. And I'll say right now, I think a table should consider house ruling an additional use of Rewrite Fate to allow you to use it on attack rolls, but without the Mythic Proficiency added to it. We don't want to lose an ability because we became Mythic. Also, unlike hero points, you start every session with 3, not 1. You can't have more than 3 Mythic points at any given time. Now, how do you regain Mythic points after you spend them? First, you can slay a Mythic opponent. We'll see Mythic monsters in the 3rd video. The killer gets 2 Mythic points, and every other person in the party gets 1. Completing a Mythic deed restores 3 Mythic points to each Mythic character in the party. Following your calling, doing something very appropriate to your calling's edicts, can earn you a Mythic point. And also, a legendary accomplishment, such as an epic sacrifice, can restore 1 or more Mythic points to a character. So on this, at least, it's asking for a little more than what you would need to earn a hero point. Given that, however, it's pretty clear from the book that they kind of want players to have Mythic points to feel awesome. For example, if you give many moderate to severe non-mythic encounters against the PCs back-to-back, they'll quickly run out of mythic resources and won't have the opportunity to enjoy the feeling of power and narrative influence that a mythic campaign is supposed to provide. And so they say that 1 out of every 3 encounters faced by a group of mythic PCs should either be a fight against mythic foes or be a mythic deed. Now, what's a mythic deed? There are some examples given in the book in relation to some of the mythic monsters provided. Think of them as trials in the story of a legendary hero, such as the labors of Hercules, or things that are extraordinarily difficult, or of just high story importance in your campaign. They give 3 mythic points to every member of your party, so they should be significant. Alright, so what about the other important use of the old hero point system, which was to prevent death? When your dying value would increase, you are able to spend all of your hero points, if you have at least one, to not die and stabilize and remain unconscious without increasing your wounded value. What happens to that? Well, that's been replaced with this. If you are a mythic character and you would die, you don't die. Instead, you stabilize, and what happens instead is that your doomed value increases by 1. Doomed is the condition that lowers the dying value you need to reach to die. So if you're doomed 1, you would die at dying 3. However, when you die then, the same thing happens. You stabilize and you become doomed 2. You actually die when your doomed value reaches 4. As normal, a full night's rest will decrease your doomed value by 1. Now, this paragraph says nothing about increasing your wounded value, which is what usually happens when you lose the dying condition in Pathfinder. I believe that is still true. In fact, there is a feat that I'll show on the screen that contemplates a mythic character having the wounded condition. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get the wounded condition. So that means the first time you would go to dying 4 and die, you are conscious, have the wounded 1 condition, and are doomed 1. So next time you are knocked out, let's say from irregular success from a strike, you go straight to dying 2 and are 1 failure away from dying at dying 3, if that all made sense. So your wounded value might increase, you might insta-die when you're knocked out to 0 hit points, but you still continue to have this fail-safe. All that happens is you don't die and your doomed value ticks up by 1. Now, this is probably good for a mythic campaign. It would be highly disruptive for a mythic character to die, especially given that the player and the GM probably had a conversation of where that character would end up and how that was related to the overall story. Also, mythic characters can, at every even level, gain an extra feat, which is a mythic feat. And starting at 12th level, these mythic feats can instead be spent on feats within your mythic destiny. Think of mythic destinies as super archetypes, and they're pretty extensive and amazing and dramatic, and so much that it's too much for me to cover in this first video. I'm saving them for the second. Now, interestingly, these mythic destinies, the book says, can be used in non-mythic campaigns. With GM permission, of course. They're all uncommon, at least. However, if you do so, you cannot use the abilities that require mythic points. Those are the more amazing things, of course, within those mythic destinies. Now, there is some language in the book that created a question for me. This language suggested to me that mythic feats were supposed to take up the free slot you get from the free archetype variant rule, the very popular variant rule. It said that the mythic rules, characters, and stories presented in this section pivot around 3 major tools: mythic points, mythic proficiency, and the free archetype system. However, I think this is a mistake. I think this last phrase should be deleted. I think these extra mythic feats are on top of a free archetype system if your table uses free archetype, because after all, it says it is an extra mythic feat, and additionally it says that mythic destinies, if used as archetypes, add the archetype trait to those feats. And since the free archetype variant rule only allows you to fill that bonus slot with archetype feats, and because these mythic feats do not have the archetype trait, that's my convoluted lawyerly way of saying I think that I'm pretty sure I'm quite certain that these extra mythic feats are supposed to be additional bonus feats on top of free archetype if your table uses free archetype. All right, let's look at the mythic feats, and there's quite a bit to look at here, and this will take up the rest of the video. There are 4 pages of them, but there are about 6 or 7 per level, and here's a table of them. Now, these level 2 and level 4 mythic feats, the vast majority of them, what they do is they allow you to do a skill action or activity at mythic proficiency, and they give some additional benefit. This level 2 feat, called Arms That Cut the Waves, let you attempt a swim check at mythic proficiency by spending a mythic point. Additionally, if you would suffocate from drowning, you can spend a mythic point to still be fine for 1 minute. Now, I think this again dramatizes the power of the core mythic ability, Rewrite Fate, that we looked at earlier, which lets you re-roll any skill check without limit or saving throw at mythic proficiency. Arms That Cut the Waves requires you to commit that mythic point in advance and only on one kind of check. This becomes more dramatic with a level 4 mythic feat called Unbelievably Believable, whose only benefit is to allow you to attempt some skill activities at mythic proficiency. There's no added benefit here. Another mythic feat that's important to fans of wrestling is Binds That Tie. This lets you grapple an opponent at mythic proficiency. You got to spend that hero point, however. The added benefit is quite good at low levels. When you successfully grapple, you deal additional bludgeoning damage equal to twice your strength modifier, plus a damage while grappling, which is already amazing in itself, is quite strong at low levels. However, strangely, it tapers off in effectiveness as you get to higher levels. This also leads to the scary situation for a GM of a character who has at least 2 mythic points being able to roll twice to grapple a foe at mythic proficiency, using this feat to spend a point on the initial attempt and then spending another point to rewrite fate. 2 mythic points sounds expensive, but a critical success, which is not out of the question, especially at low levels when you're essentially increasing your degree of success by 1 with mythic proficiency, restrains a foe, and they cannot do any attack actions or manipulate actions until they escape, which has the attack trait and increases their multiple attack penalty. It's a very powerful ability. I think they understood that, and so they have this limiter where you can only use Binds That Tie when the opponent is already grabbed by one of your allies. Now, it's when we get to level 6 feats that they move beyond the skill actions, and we see some stuff that is pretty powerful that can affect the balance of combat encounters. Now, I'm focusing on the mythic feats that looked amazing to me, and from level 6 upward, I chose most of them. Level 6, Correct the Story. When an enemy critically succeeds on an attack roll or saving throw, you can spend a mythic point and force them to re-roll. We all know the power of critical hits against a party, especially if it's coming from some boss creature. And this is one of the few abilities I've seen, maybe the first, that lets you force a creature who critically succeeds on a saving throw to have to re-roll. Hero points don't let you affect enemy saving throws. Level 6 feat Divert Destiny is pretty cool. If something would reduce you to 0 hit points or kill you outright, you spend a mythic point and you stay on your feet with a certain number of hit points, 10 plus your level, and you gain no negative effects of being knocked out, and you lose the wounded condition. There's no limit on how many times you can do this, so long as you have a mythic point, you will stay on your feet. Next is Fling into Action. This is pretty amazing. When you do a reflex save, you can spend a mythic point to get mythic proficiency on that saving throw, and if you succeed, you get to fling yourself 30 feet, and if you critically succeed, 60 feet. Now, it has to be a horizontal line or a vertical line or a near vertical line. But the example they give is when you use a reflex save to grab an edge. Let's say you fall 30 feet down off the edge of a cliff and grab an edge successfully. Well, if you critically succeed, you can fling yourself 40 feet up and 20 feet horizontally back onto the cliff. Pretty amazing. Also works for reflex saves against things like Fireball, of course. Now, the next one is Mythic Counterspell. A lot of people don't see the value of Counterspell, which, granted, is kind of niche, but it can be very powerful in the right situation, and this increases your flexibility with it a lot. First, you need 2 skill feats that as prerequisites. You need Recognize Spell, which unlocks Quick Recognition, which requires Master Proficiency in one of the 4 Magical Tradition skills. Oh, and it also requires having the Sage's Calling. But it lets you recognize spells as a free action, and when you do so, you get to use this reaction from this Mythic Feat to spend any spell slot. You don't have to know that particular spell of the spell's rank or greater to try to counteract the spell. And you get to do your counteract check at Mythic Proficiency. You'll know what that spell is in advance, and you'll know whether it's very impactful and scary, and whether you'll want to use this reaction against it. This is the most flexible counterspell ability that I think exists in the game. Next is Repel Assaults. We're still at level 6 Mythic Feats, as if you have the Guardian's Calling, this is restricted to those with the Guardian's Calling, then if an enemy's attack would deal damage to you or one of your allies equal to your level or greater, then first you get resistance to that damage equal to your level. You got to spend a Mythic Point for this. And the next strike you make against that foe until the end of your next turn is at Mythic Proficiency. So we have an instance of getting Mythic Proficiency, increasing your attack greatly. So at level 6, your champion might have a plus 15 attack bonus normally. With Mythic Proficiency, this can become plus 21. Next is a level 8 feat called Arc of Destruction. When an enemy that you observe tries to hit you with a ranged weapon, you spend a Mythic Point, you get a plus 4 status bonus to AC against it. And if you dodge it, you get to snatch it and launch it at that same foe with Mythic Proficiency. Now, if you want to use its runes and get its added effects, it needs to be a thrown weapon, or be a piece of ammunition and you have a weapon that can fire it. Next is Mythic Magic, which can give a mythic character some significant spellcasting ability, even if they're not a spellcaster. You gain 3 spells of first or second rank, it doesn't matter what traditions they come from, as long as they don't take more than 3 actions to cast and don't last longer than 10 minutes. You can spend a Mythic Point to cast any of these spells at Mythic Proficiency, Mythic Attack, Mythic DC. So if you can summon a minion, let's say a mindless undead creature, you can cast the second rank spell Final Sacrifice and do as much damage as a third rank fireball, and force every creature within 20 feet of it to save against your mythic spell DC. At higher levels, you get to use this on third rank spells and eventually at 20th level, fourth rank spells. So definitely lower rank spells, but that Mythic Proficiency part, being able to impose your Mythic Proficiency on many foes seems pretty good. The next Mythic Feat is level 8 and called Unbelievable Interception, which sounds like it would belong to the Guardian's Calling, but it's available to everybody. When an enemy that you observe tries to strike an ally that you also observe, you get to stride, well, you got to spend a Mythic Point, you get to stride up to twice up to that foe and make yourself the target instead, and if they fail to hit you, you get to smack them at Mythic Proficiency. The next feat I'll look at is level 10 Mythic Casting. This lets you cast any spell with Mythic Proficiency if you spend a Mythic Point. So now that ability to force your Mythic DC on multiple foes can be used with spells of any level, so long as you have a Mythic Point with this feat. This is one that I think might be a bit strong for this game, even a Mythic game. By my math, a level 11 caster with this spell can cast a 6th rank slow spell, which does not have the incapacitation trait, and even on a successful saving throw, makes that foe slowed 1 for 1 round. At level 11, your DC for your spells is normally 30, and enemies at that level who have a moderate saving throw will have a bonus of plus 19, so would need to roll an 11 to beat your spell DC. However, with Mythic Proficiency, your DC of 30 goes up to 36, so that means on-level foes have an 80% chance of failing a saving throw against slow and becoming slowed for an entire minute. And slow, heightened to 6th rank, can affect up to 10 creatures. Again, I think this feat, it may be overtuned, and I would warn tables to use this with caution. They were mindful enough to limit that previous feat we saw that allows spellcasting that granted Mythic Proficiency to spells of much lower rank, but no such limitation here. Okay, next is Unbreaking Castle. It's a level 10 Mythic feat. This is basically a super defend your party ability. You need to have a shield or a weapon with the parry trait. You spend 2 actions and a mythic point to raise your shield or parry. For the entire next minute, whenever you raise your shield or parry, all allies that you can see gain that AC bonus. Squares within your reach are treated as difficult terrain only for foes, and when you use the shield block reaction, after the block is complete, you can attempt a strike with that shield at mythic proficiency against an adjacent foe for this entire minute. And if instead it's a parry weapon that you have raised, if an enemy misses you, you get to attack that foe with mythic proficiency, again, over this minute. Now I understand that in the Mythic Rules book, the whole point is to have some things that are too powerful, quote unquote. However, I think this is more powerful than the other 2 powerful abilities that we've seen when you put them side by side. So a little concern of mine. Anyway, as is my usual policy, with a number of things that I pointed out in my channel as being perhaps too strong, I still allow them in my games unless that party is trivializing encounters. Then I look into possibly reining some things in. If the effect is undesired. Now, in a Mythic campaign, we do want some degree of people feeling like badasses. This is all up to every individual table. All right, some final thoughts. First, Mythic Rules look really exciting so far. It's like Pathfinder Plus, and they will prompt a table to have a different kind of campaign feel. From the get-go, you will know that and understand that your characters will be heroes of legend. They're likely going to survive with the new dying rules, and they're already a cut above other adventuring heroes. As we get to the higher level abilities in the next video, it will become clearer that there is an understanding between players and GM that your character, should they survive, will have accomplished deeds that make them immortal. Either literally immortal, or your legend will be immortal. Also, having mythic rules will affect the balance of the game. Things will be quote-unquote easier for a mythic group of characters. However, there should be punctuated moments of challenge where that party faces mythic monsters or other challenges. This also calls for more judgment on the part of the GM to balance encounters. You can't just blindly rely on the encounter building system to carry you, which you never should have done so blindly in the first place, but it's even less true now. Now's a good time to look at the guidance the book gives on how to run a mythic campaign at different tiers of play. Until the mythic characters reach 6th level, the abilities mythic characters gain basically only apply mythic proficiency to skill and perception checks. They generally do not add significant amounts of extra damage to the PC's attacks. The benefits of being mythic are basically felt in exploration and downtime mode, and in the PC's general survivability. So the GM is free to ratchet things up with skill checks in exploration mode, especially when they relate to checks that directly relate to a PC's calling. Meanwhile, if the players are finding combat boring because it's too easy, stop using trivial threat encounters and avoid low threat encounters. And here, I think for the first time in the Paizo product, we have an official acknowledgement that you want to be careful with the encounter balancing system at lower levels, that lower level parties are more fragile, and that you want to avoid extreme threat encounters and using more than one severe encounter per day, as well as boss enemies that are more than 2 levels higher than the party. Also interesting here is that we have no mention of using mythic monsters against mythic characters, which maybe is an oversight, because as we'll see in the 3rd video, you can create low-level mythic monsters. In fact, there's a level 4 mythic monster in the book. I think the expectation is that mythic monsters are less prevalent at the low levels, at least compared to higher levels. They also give guidance for running from 6th through 10th level, though I think they mean 11th level here because the next section immediately after starts with 12th level. Because at this level, mythic PCs can start making attacks at mythic proficiency, you'll want to avoid trivial threat encounters entirely and use low threat encounters only in situations where you want the PCs to feel their power. Still use severe threat encounters with care, and even if you have them go up against mythic opponents in a severe threat encounter, you want to make sure that they have a good amount of their mythic points. So basically, when they're facing mythic monsters who are posing a significant challenge, make sure they have mythic points. And back to my concern about Rewrite Fate. Now, I understand that it can't be used on attack rolls, but it does seem like it swallows a lot of the benefits you get from your callings and a lot of those lower level mythic feats. Now, it could be wrong. Maybe mythic points are so generous that the calling gives you the option to open with a mythic point to get mythic proficiency on your first attempt and not be too worried about having to spend a second mythic point to re-roll. I could be overly concerned about this. I also don't like the fact that we lose the old hero points ability of being able to re-roll an attack roll that you really want to succeed. Now, if my concerns are confirmed, then I hope Paizo addresses this. However, as is often the case with a lot of Pathfinder rules, I would, if I were running a Mythic campaign, run it as written and see how it goes first, while possibly allowing people to use the old hero point reroll of an attack roll without adding Mythic proficiency. One last concern is some callings seem to have gotten more love than others. Let's compare Bookkeeper's Calling to Caretaker's Calling. Caretaker's Calling I went over already, which lets you get mythic proficiency on a number of critical medicine checks. And in addition, there is a feat that only those with this calling can take that allows you, when an ally's dying value would increase, use a reaction and spend a mythic point to heal them immediately and get them conscious again. Meanwhile, Bookkeeper's Calling lets you attempt with mythic proficiency, a recall knowledge check with lore, or earning income with lore. Now, lore skills don't come up very often. And if some of you are wondering, oh, is this recall knowledge using any skill? No, that's reserved for another calling. That would be the Sage's Calling. Also, the additional ability to regain a mythic point if you critically succeed on a check is only if you are recalling knowledge while researching in a library or similar facility. Anyway, it seems like one of these is much more broadly applicable than the other, unless you're in some kind of freaky-deaky research-heavy campaign that, moreover, really likes your lore skill and you spend a lot of downtime in libraries. Anyway, I thought there could have been a little more love in checking the balance between different options, including that feat, that Unbreaking Castle feat we looked at earlier. Another possible issue is that mythic proficiency, because it's one step above legendary, effectively becomes less impactful as you gain levels and you start to become master and legendary in things, which is a bit strange. Of course, every +1 matters, so even when you're legendary in something, every +2 on top of legendary will still very much matter. Also, lower level PCs need help. Still, it's a little counter to what people might expect. Of course, your PCs are getting stronger and more amazing in other ways as you gain higher levels. Also, we haven't looked at the Mythic Destinies yet. Maybe that diminishing impact of your Mythic proficiency is countered by the abilities you'll get from the Mythic Destinies. We'll see. Alright, so that's it for this video. Again, it's a series on the War of Immortals book, the first 3 videos of which cover the new Mythic rules. So if you want to get notified about the next video, subscribe and ring the bell. Also, if you support my Patreon, you'll get early access to my videos. You'll get to see them as soon as I upload them. The next video will be covering level 12 and above when you are gaining Mythic Destinies. You'll see why they need their own video when we get to them. We're also going to cover Mythic spells and Mythic rituals, Mythic equipment in that video. But these 9 Mythic Destinies, they have extensive write-ups. They have a lot of feats, 10 to 20 each in fact, and they're pretty amazing, have pretty amazing abilities. And one of them, in fact, lets you become a god.